Today we expose the 8 bread brands the UK supermarket industry has spent decades hoping you'd never look at too closely. Not because the truth is complicated, because it isn't, and simple truths, when they're this damaging, are the ones these companies work hardest to keep quiet. And before anyone says it, no, I'm not here to tell you to stop eating bread. What I am telling you is that the bread on supermarket shelves right now is not the bread your grandparents ate, not even close. And the gap between what it was and what it has silently become is something these companies are actively counting on you never investigating. Bread was 4 ingredients: flour, water, yeast, salt. That fed entire civilisations. Nobody needed calcium propionate, E471, or acetylated tartaric acid esters, because none of it makes bread better. It makes it cheaper to produce, faster to manufacture, and more profitable per unit. That's the only reason it's in there, not your health. Margins. What's going to unsettle you most isn't just what's in these products, it's how long this has been going on and how confidently these brands are still doing it. So that's what we're doing today. Pulling back the label, naming the 8 brands you need to think seriously about before they end up in your trolley again. If what you're about to hear makes you angry, and it should, hit that like button and subscribe right now. These corporations are spending millions keeping this buried. The least we can do is make sure it doesn't. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about something most people have never been told. Because most people look at a loaf of bread on a supermarket shelf and assume the biggest risks are calories and carbs. That's what the industry trained you to focus on: macros, calories per slice, whether it's white or brown, whether it has seeds on top. What they never trained you to look at is the ingredient list below the nutrition panel. The bit with the long chemical names most people skip because they don't recognize them and assume that means they must be fine. Here's what ultra-processed bread actually contains and what those ingredients are doing. Calcium propionate. That's E282. It's a mold inhibitor that keeps bread from going stale or growing mold at the rate real bread would. Several studies have flagged it as a potential contributor to gut microbiome disruption. And some research has linked it to behavioral changes in children. It's there purely to extend shelf life. Your grandmother's loaf didn't have it. Emulsifiers like E471, which are mono and diglycerides of fatty acids. These are added to improve the texture and softness of bread by mimicking what fat does in artisan baking, except artificially and at scale. Your body doesn't process these the same way it processes real food fats. Research from King's College London, published in 2023, found associations between high emulsifier intake and increased cardiovascular risk. Flour treatment agents like ascorbic acid, which sound harmless because ascorbic acid is vitamin C, except in industrial bread production, it's not being used for nutritional purposes. It's being used as a dough conditioner to speed up the industrial baking process and improve the structure of bread that's been made too fast and with too little natural fermentation. Seed oils, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, sometimes labeled as vegetable oil. Added to bread because they're cheaper than butter, they extend softness and they increase shelf life. High in omega-6 fatty acids at a ratio that most Western diets already have, wildly out of balance compared to omega-3s. The research on chronic high omega-6 intake and inflammation is not encouraging, and yet it's in your morning toast. Soya flour. A cheap filler used to improve the rise, the texture, and the protein content numbers on the label without actually improving the quality of the bread. Real bread, made properly with time, fermentation, quality flour, and nothing else, doesn't need any of this. The only reason it's in there is because industrial bread is not made properly. It's made quickly at enormous scale and with cost efficiency as the overriding priority. And the result is a product that looks like bread, feels like bread, and tastes vaguely like bread, but behaves very differently inside your body. Now, the 8 brands you need to know about. Number 8, Tesco Everyday Value, white sliced. This is the entry point. The loaf millions of British households throw into the trolley without a second glance because it's cheap, because it's familiar, and because something this basic couldn't possibly be a problem, could it? Yes, it could. Tesco's own brand, Everyday White Sliced, is exactly what budget mass production looks like when cost is the only variable that matters. Refined white flour stripped of its natural fiber and nutrients during milling, then partially supplemented with synthetic vitamins to replace what the milling process removed. That should already tell you something. They strip the nutrition out and then add artificial versions back in. That's not food made with care. That's food engineered to hit a nutritional label number at minimum cost. Then there's the emulsifiers to keep the crumb artificially soft, the calcium propionate to prevent mold, the flour treatment agents to speed up dough development in a factory environment, the rapeseed oil because it's cheap and it extends shelf life. And the result is a loaf with a shelf life so long it should make you uncomfortable. Real bread goes stale. Real bread ages. This doesn't. Ask yourself why. This is also the loaf that's trained a generation of British children to believe that bread should feel like a foam sponge, soft, uniform, perfectly shaped, identical from one end to the other. But that's not what bread is. That texture is manufactured. It's an engineered illusion, and it comes with a cost. The people buying this loaf aren't buying it because they want ultra-processed food. They're buying it because it's affordable and it's familiar. And that's precisely what makes this so cynical. Number 7, Kingsmill 50/50, the loaf that has spent decades pretending to be the responsible choice, the intelligent compromise, the loaf you buy when you want to feel like you're doing right by your family without giving up the softness and convenience of white bread. Peel back the branding, and the reality is far less flattering. Kingsmill 50/50 markets itself on being high in fiber, great for families, a healthy balance, all language carefully chosen by a marketing department that knows exactly which words make British parents feel better about what they're putting in the lunchbox. But the actual formulation tells a different story. The base is still predominantly refined wheat flour. The fiber content that earns the high fiber claim comes largely from added wheat fiber, not from the kind of slow, whole grain processing that actually changes how your body handles the carbohydrate load. Adding fiber back to refined bread is a bit like taking all the goodness out of a food and then adding a vitamin tablet. The label looks better, the product isn't. Then you've got the standard industrial package: rapeseed oil, emulsifiers, preservatives, dough conditioners, soya flour, flour treatment agents. A formula designed to produce a consistent, soft, shelf-stable loaf at maximum volume and minimum cost. And here's the thing that should really stop you. Kingsmill didn't always make bread like this. Their early loaves were genuinely close to simple. Flour, water, yeast, salt, a touch of fat. Something you could trace back to a real baking tradition. The shift happened slowly, quietly, incrementally, as the industrial bread market became more competitive and the pressure to cut costs and extend shelf life increased. Nobody announced the change. Nobody told the British public that what they'd trusted for years had been quietly reformulated into something very different. The branding stayed the same. The slogans stayed the same. The ingredient list got longer and longer and longer. Number 6, Hovis Soft White Thick. This is the one that stings the most for a lot of people. Because Hovis isn't just a bread brand, it's a British institution. The nostalgia embedded in that name, the heritage advertising, the boy on the bicycle, the cobbled street, the smell of fresh bread. They've spent over a century building one of the most emotionally resonant brand images in the entire British food industry. And then they filled the loaf with palm oil, seed oils, emulsifiers, preservatives, and synthetic additives. Hovis Soft White Thick is, by any fair reading of its ingredient list, an ultra-processed product. The soft thick format, the one families buy precisely because it feels generous and comforting, is loaded with dough conditioners and emulsifiers specifically engineered to produce and maintain that artificially plush texture. The softness isn't baking craft, it's chemistry. There's also the palm oil question. Bread, plain, ordinary white bread, the thing that's been made with flour, water, yeast, and salt for 5,000 years. Why does it contain palm oil? The answer is purely economic. Palm oil is cheap, it's stable, it extends shelf life, and it creates a smooth crumb texture that requires less skill and less time to produce than traditional bread making. It has nothing to do with quality and everything to do with margin. Hovis built its entire identity on the idea of honest British baking heritage. Their old recipe was, by all accounts, something genuine. A proper British loaf you could smell and feel and trust. That loaf went stale after a day or two because it was real food. It was alive. What they sell today is engineered to remain soft for a week. That should tell you everything. Number 5, Warburton's Toasty White. Warburton's is a family brand. That's the message. The Warburton's family, British baking, northern roots, generations of tradition. It's in the advertising, it's in the tone, it's in every piece of marketing they produce. And for a huge proportion of the British public, it's a brand they feel genuine warmth toward. Which is exactly why the ingredient list on Warburton's Toasty White deserves a very close look. Emulsifiers, mono and diglycerides of fatty acids, rapeseed oil, flour treatment agent, soya flour, preservative calcium propionate, calcium carbonate, niacin, iron, thiamine, riboflavin, folic acid. Some of those vitamins at the end of the list sound like a positive, and they're listed as though they are. But many of them are there because the milling and processing of industrial flour strips out the naturally occurring versions, and the synthetic replacements are added back in compliance with UK bread fortification regulations, not as a bonus nutritional feature. You are, in effect, paying for a product that removes nutrition and then partially replaces it with cheaper synthetic equivalents and presents that as a feature. The toasty format is also worth interrogating. It's specifically designed and sized to fit perfectly in a toaster to produce consistent, even slices every time, to deliver a product that behaves identically from the first slice to the last. That level of consistency in a baked product is not natural. It's engineered. Real bread is irregular. Real bread has character and variance because it's made with live cultures that behave differently day to day, season to season. This bread is made in a factory. It is designed to be a machine-perfect product from start to finish, and the chemical toolkit required to make it that way is sitting right there in the ingredient list, if you know what you're looking at. Number 4, Asda Bakery Soft White. The word bakery is doing an enormous amount of work on this label, and Asda knows it, because the word bakery is powerful. It conjures something specific, an oven, an apron, flour on a surface, someone who knows what they're doing, who cares about what they're making, who would recognize and take pride in the finished product. That's the image Asda wants in your mind when you reach for this loaf. Asda's bakery, Soft White, is not made in a bakery in any meaningful sense of the word. It's produced in a large industrial facility. It's pre-mixed, pre-processed, mechanically shaped, sliced, and bagged at scale. There is no artisan involved. There is no traditional process. The word bakery on the label is a marketing decision, not a description of how the bread was made. Look at the ingredient list and ask honestly whether any part of it resembles something a genuine baker would create. Refined flour with the germ and bran stripped out. Rapeseed oil, emulsifiers, preservatives, flour treatment agents, sugars, soya flour, calcium propionate to prevent mold. Past the point any natural product should stay mold-free. This is an industrial product wearing a bakery costume, and the pricing strategy reinforces the deception because it's affordable enough that most people won't stop to examine what's in it. When something is cheap enough, familiar enough, and labeled with reassuring words like bakery and soft and white, the instinct to look closer disappears. Asda is relying on that instinct failing you every single week. High salt, barely any naturally occurring fiber, refined carbohydrates that spike blood sugar, multiple emulsifiers with documented effects on gut microbiome integrity, zero nutritional depth beyond the synthetically added vitamins. Millions of people eat this every day, believing it's a harmless staple. Number 3, Sainsbury's Basics white bread. This one matters because of what it says about who the food industry thinks deserves real food. Sainsbury's Basics range is explicitly positioned as the affordable option. The range for people watching what they spend. The product for families on tight budgets who still need to put bread on the table every morning. And what Sainsbury's has decided to offer those families is a loaf built on the absolute floor of what bread is legally permitted to be. Refined wheat flour, rapeseed oil, emulsifiers, calcium propionate, flour treatment agents, soya flour, the full industrial package, just at a price point that makes questioning it feel ungrateful. But here's what's really happening. The families buying Sainsbury's Basics white bread because it's what they can afford are being served the most heavily processed, most chemically dependent version of bread in the entire supermarket. The people with the least money to spend on food are being handed the product that required the least investment to produce. That's not value. That's an inversion of it. And here's the thing the supermarkets have never wanted you to calculate. The hidden cost of buying cheap, low-quality bread is not just nutritional, it's practical. When bread has almost no natural flavor, no real fermentation character, no depth, you compensate. You add more butter to make it taste like something. You toast it longer. You pile on the toppings. You end up spending more to make a cheap loaf palatable than you would have spent buying something that actually tasted like food in the first place. The cheap tin isn't cheap when you add up what you spend to fix it. The cheap loaf isn't cheap either. Number 2, Aldi Village Bakery Medium White. The Village Bakery name is doing exactly the same thing for Aldi that the word bakery does for Asda. It's creating an image that has absolutely nothing to do with what's inside the bag. There is no village. There is no bakery in the traditional sense. There is a large-scale industrial production line delivering a white sliced loaf that carries the same long chemical ingredient list every other mass-market loaf carries. Emulsifiers, preservatives, flour treatment agents, soya flour, rapeseed oil, calcium propionate, the architecture of ultra-processed bread wrapped in a label that implies something wholesome and local and honest. But here is where Aldi's entry on this list becomes something significantly more serious than misleading branding. In March 2024, Aldi was forced to recall their Village Bakery 8 tortilla wraps white from every shelf in the country. Every pack with best before dates up to April 29, 2024 had to be pulled. The reason? Possible metal fragments inside the product. And this was not a quiet, voluntary withdrawal. The Food Standards Agency issued a stark, unambiguous "do not eat" warning, and the police were called in over suspected tampering. Think about what that means for a moment. Families buying these for their children's school lunches, parents trusting the Village Bakery name on the packaging because it sounds safe and familiar, and all that time, metal fragments may have been inside the food. Now, the tortilla wrap recall is a separate product from their standard white sliced loaf, but it comes from the same brand, the same production philosophy, and the same corner-cutting culture that puts a friendly village image on mass-produced industrial food. And it raises a very fair question about what level of oversight and quality control exists in a supply chain where metal contamination reaches a product and isn't caught until it's already on shelves and in cupboards across the country. The Village Bakery name suggests artisan craftsmanship. The 2024 recall tells you something very different about what's actually going on behind the label. Number 1. Stamford Street Company, medium white bread. And this is where the whole story of British supermarket bread arrives at its logical destination. Stamford Street Company medium white bread is a budget loaf sold across multiple UK retailers. It's the product that turns up at the very bottom. The price range, the loaf you might grab almost without thinking because it costs almost nothing and it fills a bag and it technically counts as bread. Except the ingredient list reads like the contents of a laboratory supply cabinet. Soya flour, calcium propionate, emulsifier mono and diacetyl tartaric acid esters of mono and diglycerides of fatty acids, rapeseed oil, flour treatment agent ascorbic acid, palm oil. Read that again. That is what they are selling as bread in British supermarkets in 2025. A product that contains an emulsifier so industrially complex that its full name takes up a significant portion of the ingredient panel. A product with both rapeseed oil and palm oil because apparently one cheap industrial oil wasn't enough. A product that contains calcium propionate to prevent a natural biological process because it needs to stay shelf-stable far longer than any real loaf of bread should survive. And if the ingredient list wasn't enough to stop you cold, go and look at the customer reviews. The sheer volume of 1- and 2-star ratings is remarkable. People describing it as plasticky, bland, stale tasting even when eaten fresh out of a brand new bag. Several reviewers have noted that birds in their gardens refuse to eat it when offered the discarded crusts. Wild birds, pigeons, creatures that will eat almost anything and have no understanding of brand loyalty or marketing, and they won't touch this bread. That tells you something. When street birds that happily eat soggy chips and discarded kebab meat turn their beaks up at your product, the product has a problem that no amount of clever packaging is going to solve. This loaf is the perfect encapsulation of everything that is wrong with the ultra-processed British bread market. Minimum possible cost, maximum possible volume, chemical toolkit in place of real ingredients, zero nutritional integrity, and a price point low enough that questioning it feels excessive because it's only bread, and how bad can it really be? This bad? That's how bad. So what do you actually do about this? Because this isn't just an exercise in making you angry, though you probably should be angry. This is about giving you the tools to make better choices every single week, regardless of where you shop or what your budget looks like. The first thing you need to do is start reading ingredient lists, not the nutrition panel, the ingredient list. If you're looking at a loaf of bread and the ingredient list contains more than 6 or 7 items, put it back. Real bread, made properly, doesn't need preservatives, emulsifiers, dough conditioners, or industrial oils. If they're in there, they're there because the bread was made badly and quickly and needs chemistry to compensate for what the process lacked. The second thing is to look for bread made with longer fermentation times. Sourdough, when it's genuine, sourdough made with a live culture and given proper time to ferment, requires almost no additives because the fermentation process does naturally what calcium propionate and emulsifiers are added artificially to achieve. Natural acids produced during fermentation inhibit mold. Natural gluten development during long fermentation creates structure without flour treatment agents. A real sourdough loaf with just flour, water, salt, and a live culture will outperform any industrial loaf on every meaningful measure. If budget is a genuine constraint, which it is for millions of British households, the answer isn't to accept the worst of the ultra-processed options. It's to buy less bread and buy better bread, 2 or 3 slices of a genuine sourdough from a local bakery, or a small loaf from a supermarket in-store bakery that genuinely bakes on-site will do more for you than a week's worth of the industrial alternatives. You can also bake at home, not every week if life doesn't allow it, but occasionally, because bread made at home with flour, water, yeast, and salt costs almost nothing per loaf. It takes far less active time than most people think, and the result is something that tastes like food and behaves like food, and doesn't require a chemistry degree to understand the ingredient list. The brands worth buying, if you need a guide, are those built on short, honest ingredient lists. Genuine bakery brands, real sourdough producers, and the smaller, independent supermarket ranges that source from proper bakeries rather than industrial production. Lines. Look for bread that goes stale within 2 or 3 days. That's not a flaw. That's what real bread does. It's alive. It ages. It has a natural cycle. Any loaf that's sitting in your cupboard a week after you bought it and still feels soft and fresh is not behaving like food. It's behaving like a laboratory product, because that's what it is. The uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this is simple. The bread industry in the UK has been running a very long and very successful deception. They kept the name bread, they kept the emotional connection, they kept the familiar packaging and the trusted heritage branding, and they quietly replaced the product inside with something built for profit, not for people. Every year the ingredient lists get longer. Every year more corners get cut. Every year the food inside the familiar bag drifts further from anything that deserves the name it's been given. Not because it makes the bread better, not because it nourishes the families eating it, because it extends shelf life, speeds up production, reduces waste, and boosts margins. And we've been paying the price with our health, with the quality of what we eat, and with the slow erosion of what British bread was supposed to be. You don't have to accept this. You have a choice every single week, every single time you walk past the bread aisle. The moment enough people start reading labels, start choosing better, start demanding real food instead of Frankenstein imitations, is the moment the industry is forced to respond. They track every purchase. They know exactly which products are being left on shelves and why. Your trolley is a vote. Use it. Until then, stay aware, stay sharp, and protect your plate.